Okay, it seems as though everybody is good. They can all see in here. So I'm going to go ahead and start. Let me just do another couple of things. Okay, so I am talking today about Infinia Integrator. Thank you guys all for taking the time to join me for this webinar. I'm going to show you a very cool import tool called Infinia Integrator. I've been working with Informed Systems for about 4 years now, and during that time I've done countless data imports. And until a few weeks ago, each and every one of those was done using either Integration Manager or Scribe, which are other integration tools. While those are both excellent tools, they absolutely require that you spend time configuring each import before you run them. If you've ever used those tools to import data and felt they were too complicated for your needs, then this integrator tool might be just the answer to your frustrations. With this tool, if you can copy and paste, you can import data into GP. Let me switch my view. Oh, hold on one moment. Sorry, bear with me. Okay, thank you. So Infinia's Integrator can be purchased on a module-by-module basis, or you can buy it as a package with discount pricing. It can be used to import journal entries, as well as a variety of payables, receivables, and payroll transactions. Please note that it does not import transactions into either the sales order processing or the purchase order processing modules. For the modules that are supported, though, the basic process is to have the software create your template for you, and then populate that template, copy and paste from Excel back into the integrator for validation purposes, and then run your import. So it's very easy. Transactions will be brought into Dynamics GP in batches, which can then be posted at any time. Once the integrator creates a template for you, you can save it for reuse if you like, or you can create a fresh template every time you want to import data. Pasting from Excel into the integrator prior to running the import allows the integrator to validate your data for such things as invalid general ledger accounts or pay codes, or inactive customers or vendors, employees, and so on. So that is it, really, for my slides. I'm going to instead spend most of my time actually showing you the product. So first, let me just show you. I have GP open. By the way, I am demonstrating today in GP 2010 version, so my screens may look a little bit different than yours. And also, since this is my test playground and I am logged in as an administrator, I have everything turned on, so I may have a lot more options than what you're used to seeing. But here is the integrator interface. Let me go to the home page, and this is the home page. So the first thing I want to show you is the security for this tool. Oh, and I'm sorry, one other thing. I am, if you'll notice, using an evaluation copy. So when we run imports, you'll see some pop-up messages related to the fact that I'm using an evaluation copy. So this is not a full version. However, back to what I was saying, the first thing I want to show you is the security for the tool. You can set up your users so that they have full access or so that they are limited to particular screens. So in here you can see I just have one user set up and I am allowed to see all windows. You can see as I kind of scroll down this list that if I needed to or wanted to, I could create another user, and I could actually say that Lynn needs to be allowed to use journal entries, and she can also do payable transaction entry, and those would be the only two windows I would be allowed to see. So you can be very specific with how you assign security. You can also, I'm going to delete that row so that there's no conflict with security. You can also toggle using company security off or on, and what this does is this maps to your GP users. So this second tab here is currently not available. I'm clicking on it and it's not allowing me to see the screen until I choose to use company security. And then when I do that, it enables this tab. And what this does for me is it lists all the users that I have set up in GP, and it allows me to map the security that I set up in the first window to the specific GP user IDs so that they will only be allowed to import into the companies where they actually have GP login access. So in other words, if you have multiple Dynamics GP companies and a specific user only has access to 1 or 2 or 3 of those, if you utilize this setting in your security setup, that user would only be allowed to integrate into those specific companies. And that is how the security works. So back over here, let's first show an import of journal entries. So I'm going to show in the demo today journal entries and payables. Payables and receivables are very, very similar, so I'm just going to show payables. And then we do have one person on the call today who uses payroll, so I'm also going to do a quick payroll import as well. So this is the message I was talking about based on the fact that I'm using an evaluation copy of an Infinia Integrator. So I'm just going to click OK through the message. Your first step when you're importing any of the transactions, be them journal entries or payables or payroll and so on, is to select the company and enter the header information. So I'm going to choose my test company. This pops up because it pulls, the Infinia Integrator pulls the current system date, and my Dynamics GP sample company is using the fiscal year 2017. So this is just a warning message where the system knows. So I'm going to go ahead and change my date so that I don't have that conflict, so that it matches my sample company there. And I'll go ahead and import into April of that year. And then here, Infinia Integrator, I can actually import into an existing batch. So if I had an existing batch of journal entries that I wanted to import these into, I could use this test batch, which is a recurring monthly batch, or I can actually create a new batch from Infinia Integrator by clicking on this new batch icon. So I can say demo, and I can even set up from Infinia Integrator a recurring batch if I needed to, but I don't have to. In this case, I'm just going to do a single-use batch. And then this reference here, this is similar to the GP journal entry screen. Now, when importing journal entries, you can only import one journal entry at a time. In all the other modules that Infinia Integrator has, you will be able to import whole batches of transactions in a single import. However, for journal entries, you can only bring in one entry at a time. Now, for journal entries, I have an easy way to manage the one-by-one entry import process, which I'll show you when we get to the spreadsheet side of this. So as you've seen, it automatically validates my date. Here is my reference, which is my journal entry title, so to speak. So let me just. And then the way that this process works is pretty easy. Basically, I'm going to click this Excel button, and what this is going to do for me is it's going to help me create my template. So when I click Excel, it tells me that the field names have been copied to my clipboard. And then all I need to do is go into Excel and use my paste function to create the template. So I'll say OK, and then I'll jump over to Excel. And then here I have a pre-designed spreadsheet that I've been using for this demo. And all I'm going to do in here is I'm going to paste, and it automatically pastes the columns that it wants me to use. So at this point, I can fill in the spreadsheet with the general ledger accounts, the debits, credits, individual distribution references if I needed to. Notice that it tells me that these fields are optional. And then once that's done, I can import those transactions back into GP. So that's as simple as it is to create a template. I'm going to go ahead and use my pre-populated template to show you. Now this is my trick that I was talking about for managing the individual journal entries. So what I've done here is I have added a column to the template that it provided for me. So if I pop back over here, notice that it populated 4 columns that it needs me to fill in order to be able to import journal entries. What I've done to make my process a little bit easier is I added an extra column, which I'm allowed to do because the system doesn't care if I add extra columns that it's not using. And so I made an accrued expenses journal entry, a prepaid expenses journal entry, and then another entry and a couple more entries. And the reason that I did that is so that I can tell myself where one journal entry ends and another journal entry begins. And then the way that I had this over here is I actually used my grouping function within Excel to be able to very easily visually see also where one journal entry ends and another begins. So what my process looks like is these are the only 4 columns that I need to import into Infinia Integrator. So this one was for my own use. So I'm just going to ignore that column for this purpose. So here's my one journal entry. I'm going to go ahead and use my copy function, pop back to the integrator, and I'm going to use my paste function up here. And it brings in those distributions for me. And notice right here I have row 1 automatically highlighted, and this is telling me no errors are found. And it would highlight a row that did have an error. If you want to confirm, you can actually kind of click down through, and as you go through, you'll notice that it'll tell you if there's a problem with that particular row. So now at this point, this particular transaction has no errors, so I can go ahead and import it. Here are my import options. I can choose to just see a report that would tell me whether this entry will successfully import or not, or I can display that report as well as perform the import, or if I'm comfortable with this, since I know there are no errors, I can choose to simply import, or of course I can cancel and choose not to import at this time. So I'll go ahead and do both. And now it has finished importing. And then if I make this a little bigger, we can see, let me see if I can make it a little smaller. It's almost too big. You can see it just gives me a printout of what it imported. And if I pop into Dynamics GP and go over to my financial page and take a look, we'll be able to see the batch that I created, which was called Demo. And it shows me one transaction is in there. And if I take a look at the transaction, it's going to be down here. That's not the one, sorry. Here it is, Infinia Demo. And here's my transaction. So it brought in the transaction into the demo batch. So now, just for example, let me go ahead and bring in some other entries into that same batch. So I'll go ahead and I'll pull this other entry in. I'm going to, again, copy. And then I can close this printout here. I'm going to do a new entry now. So I'm going to say New. And notice when I clicked on that, it kept my header information here. And then all I have to do now is paste. So it's importing into the same batch. So now I'm importing a second transaction into the same batch that I had the first time. Now notice here, on row 1, no errors are found. It defaults to highlight that first row for me. But down here, I see right away that row 3 is highlighted because there's a problem, and it's telling me that this account is not found. I can see that. And if I come down to the row and highlight it, you can see also that it tells me it's an invalid account number. So what I need to do is fix my entry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click New so that I can erase this invalid information. You can kind of see that I left off that third segment in my account number there. So I'm going to jump to my spreadsheet and fix that. And then all I have to do is redo my copy and paste. And now nothing's highlighted, so I can just confirm row 2, nothing, no errors, and row 3, no errors. So now I'm going to go ahead and import again. This time I'm just going to choose to import only, and it goes very quickly. The only reason it took a little bit longer the first time is because it was generating that report for me. And if I just hop back to GP once again and pull up that batch, you can see now I have 2 transactions in there, and so on. So that's how I can build my batch. So let me now show you how to bring in a payroll transaction or a payables transaction. So once again, if I come into the integrator, I'm going to close tabs so I can get back to the main screen of my integrator. And I'm going to go ahead and show you a little bit about how I set up payables transaction entry. So there's a lot of options in here that you can turn on or not turn on. Required fields are always required, so notice there are no options in this block here that I can turn on or off because, of course, they're required. However, in the payment terms section, I can make my template that I'm using be more or less detailed depending on my needs. So I can choose to go ahead and import payment terms, or I can import them, and if I don't have them in the spreadsheet, then the system will get the default value from the vendor. So once you do that, then you have these other fields that come in. And then you can also bring in descriptions or PO numbers into your payables transaction, address IDs, same options. You can not import them at all, or you can choose to import them or allow the import to override whatever the default might be. And if the import does not have a value, it will go ahead, to your vendor card and pull that data from GP. So I'm going to leave everything in here the way that it was. So what I have in here is that I am bringing in my required fields. I'm also going to go ahead and import descriptions and purchase orders, as well as general ledger accounts. So I'm going to close these tabs and show you a payable transaction entry. And remember, here in these other modules, in the other 3 modules, you can import multiple transactions at one time. So this again is my message telling you that I'm using the evaluation copy, and I'm going to go ahead and proceed. So once again, I'm going to import into my Fabricam test company, and I'm going to, I don't know if I have an existing batch or not, does not appear to be the case, so I'll create a new batch. And I can set my posting date. Now again, I am in a 2017 fiscal year in my test company, so I'm going to change this date here. And again, I can do multiple recurring batches, or I can do just a single-use batch. So I'm going to keep the single-use default. And then just as with the journal entry import, I'm going to have the system create for me a template. So I'm going to click my Excel button to copy the field name. Now, based on the settings in the payables transaction entry setup, meaning those required fields plus the document description and the purchase order number and the journal entry distributions, it's going to create a template for me based on those settings. So field names have been copied. I'll hop back to Excel, and I'll go to my payables demo window and just use my paste function, and it brings those field titles in there for me. So description and purchases and PO number, these have all been pulled into this template because of the options that I chose in that top right-hand block of the setup. And then the general ledger distribution information has been brought in because in the other block I chose to go ahead and import journal entry distributions. Now, if you have all of your vendors set up, pre-configured to have default posting accounts, you can ignore this section. However, most folks don't have every vendor set up with a default posting account. Therefore, I think a typical example would be to bring in journal entries. So here I have a pre-configured set of payables to bring in. On purpose, I have some errors in here, so we're going to just see what happens. So here is the same template that I'm using over here that has been pre-configured for me. So I just populated this in advance with some data. And you can kind of see here, based on my document number, here I have one document that has 3 distributions to it. So this is a single document. And then I have document number 2, document number 3, and document number 4 based on the document numbers. So this document number is the means by which in this view I can see where one document ends and another begins. And I am bringing in debits and credits and the appropriate journal entry accounts, general ledger accounts rather. So just like with the journal entries, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste all this data. And it brings it in right away. Now notice in my spreadsheet I had 6 lines, and in the integrator here you're seeing 4 lines because it was really 4 transactions. And there are plus signs here where I can actually expand this to see the distributions that I'm bringing in. So here's where I get to all those other lines. So that makes the view a little bit harder to read, but certainly able to see the data that's in here before you bring it in. So the problem here, I have an error. The document number already exists in the grid. And if I take a look at transaction 2, the distributions don't equal the purchases amount, so they don't balance. Number 3 is fine, and number 4 is fine. So let's go ahead and start this over. And the reason there was a problem is just because of the way that the integrator would like you to handle a transaction that has multiple distributions. So the way that it wants you to bring this in is to actually skip or bypass this header information. So whereas on my original spreadsheet, I copied these pieces of data down to the lines below them, what the system actually wants me to do is just to simply leave those blank. So I only have to put that in one time, and then however many distributions there are is fine. And then the other thing that I have here is a credit memo of 20, purchase order 25. Thought that it was telling me that this didn't balance, but I don't see a problem there. So let's try to just copy and paste this back in again, and we'll see what happens with this. Oops. Copy and paste. In row 1, no errors. Row 2, no errors. 3 and 4 are fine. So here's an example where I have 4 transactions going into a single batch. And I'm going to go ahead and import this. I'll display the audit report this time. And now it has finished. And I can see, let's make this 100%. So we can see this first transaction and the distribution. And as we scroll down, we'll go to the next page, we can see the next transaction and the third and the fourth. So you get a really detailed report on what exactly you brought in. This is over and above the GP reports that you get when you have transactions coming in. So if we take a look in purchasing at our batches, we should be able to find our Infinia demo batch, which has 4 transactions, and we can take a look at them. And one of them was a credit memo, so let me just kind of go through. Here was the first invoice that had multiple distributions. Now, one other thing I wanted to point out is in my spreadsheet, notice that I only brought in the expense accounts that I'm distributing to. I don't have to bring in the payable side of my distributions. So in GP, it automatically knows what my payables account is and offsets whatever I've brought in correctly to the payables account. So if I scroll to the next voucher, here is my credit memo that I brought in. And when I look at the distributions, you can see that here in this case, it correctly brought in the accounts payable amount as the debit and the expense account line as the credit, and so on for the other 2 transactions. So here's the third, and then the fourth transaction. And I did bring in, I believe, on all of them, distribution references, just to point that out as well. You can bring in distribution references into your transactions. Optional. You do not have to bring that in every time unless you need to. And then at this point, all I have to do is post the batch as I normally would in GP, the same way that you would do if you were using any of the other integration tools that are out there. So notice so far that what we've kind of talked about is how the system immediately validates everything that you're bringing in, whether or not it's balanced in your debits and credits, whether or not the general ledger accounts exist or not, whether or not the vendor IDs that you use are valid existing vendor IDs in Dynamics GP. All of that happens immediately after you click Paste in the Integrator module. Okay, now just because we do have one person on the call who is using payroll, I just want to do a quick payroll transaction entry. And similar to the payables and receivables, you have a lot of different options with how you set up what gets imported into payroll when you import transactions. So you can choose whether the pay period comes from the header or from individual transactions, whether or not you're actually importing the amounts and the positions and lots of other data regarding the pay codes and the taxes and so on. So I just have a simple setting set up here just to show a very quick demo. So once again, in the header section, I choose the company. I believe I have a batch. No, I don't. So I'll make a batch. Once again, single use. I'll do a better pay period. So I've done a week's worth of a pay period, and I'm going to use Excel to copy my field name. Jump to Excel and paste. And this is what the template looks like. And then here I've filled in 2 payroll transactions. So I have 1 hourly employee that's going in. So for an hourly employee, and you could, if you had an employee who had multiple pay codes, you can of course bring in multiple transactions for a single employee and just use the correct pay codes so maybe hour 1, hour 2, and so on, however many, whatever the pay codes were for the employee. And then I also have, for demonstration purposes, a salaried employee in here as well. So all I need to do is, again, copy and paste. There's no errors here, and there are no errors here. So you can see I only had very, very few pieces of information when I copied this, but in this screen you can see that it pulled out of GP for me lots of other information. So I can see before I actually run the import what this is going to look like. So as I scroll through, you can see all the different information that it pulls from GP here for me. And if any of this doesn't look correct, I can do what I need to do to get that corrected on the GP side before I actually run the import. So here I'm going to go ahead and just import. And in this case, I'm just going to quickly do an import. I don't want to take too much of your time. And then I'll jump to GP and take a look at that batch. So here's my Infinia demo batch. Here are those 2 transactions that it brought in for me. So Pilar Ackerman has 40 hours, and Luis Boniface has 8 hours getting reduced off of his salary pay code because he's getting docked for some reason. So you can see here is where it's reducing his hours. And that's it. It's very simple to use. Again, just that I think it's their motto for this company, but if you can copy and paste, then you can import transactions. So let me jump back to my slide deck here for a second. I'm not sure why that didn't go back to the next. No. Okay. So if you'd like more information about Infinia's Integrator product, the best place to go is straight to their source on their website. ExcelIntegrator.com has many short video demonstrations of each of these different types of imports, as well as additional contact information. And if you would like to request a quote, you can contact Melissa Francisco here in my office at Informed Systems, and she can coordinate scheduling of a more in-depth demo if you need, or she can forward system requirements to you and so on. And of course, you can also please feel free to contact me. The best way to reach me is by email, and my email address is here, lynn@isisupport.com. And with all that said, let me just open our phone lines in case you guys have any other questions. I'm just going down and unmuting everybody.